The classes of vanilla World of Warcraft went through so many changes during the alpha and beta stages of the game. After all, Blizzard had already made so many spells during the Warcraft RTS games that they had some good ideas in place that just needed to now fit into a class-based system for the mmorpg instead. Some of the spells which you see in game are direct copies from the RTS games, whether they're used by NPCs or players, and some of them are totally new additions to the WoW universe. Today I want to talk about some very early experimentations that were had during the WoW alpha and beta stages of the game, and to just show you how different classes could have been if Blizzard decided to go in a different direction. All of these are from old WoW databases showing spells or abilities which used to exist in the game's files, but were ultimately decided not to be used or were changed to make them different from any live ability. So they'll all have the ZZ old prefix in front of their name to push them to the bottom of the search engine so they wouldn't be used by mistake during development. I've taken a few abilities which have more detailed descriptions for every single one of Vanilla's classes, and there is some real obscure stuff here which I had not heard of whatsoever till I started looking into this. So let's make a start and talk about some more unknown abilities that were lost to time in Vanilla World of Warcraft. But first, a quick word from today's sponsor, Crystal of Atlan. Crystal of Atlan is a brand new cross-platform Magic Punk MMO action RPG where you can get ahead by pre-registering now to claim exclusive rewards and unlock early access. During the pre-registration milestone event, tons of rewards will become available as the game grows, and once the 8 million milestone is achieved, you'll earn the Legends Return outfit and so much more. Crystal of Atlan offers fluid, responsive combat where the player can chain together combinations of abilities in satisfying gameplay. This combat system extends into the air with unique aerial mechanics, adding a vertical layer that brings something new to the typical MMORPG combat style. From the start, multiple classes are already available, each featuring over 20 skills for flexible and personalized gameplay. There's also multiplayer content too, which includes cooperative dungeons and a guild fleet system, encouraging teamwork within the game and grouping up with others in the world. This is all set in an extensive world where magic meets technology. Players will explore ancient ruins, uncover long-lost secrets, and face powerful enemies as they journey through Atlan. So check the link in the description to get a start and get ahead now by pre-registering for Crystal of Atlan today to be in for a chance for in-game and real-life rewards. Many thanks to Crystal of Atlan for sponsoring today's video. Let's get on back to WoW. Paladins were perhaps the single most changed class from alpha all the way to release. For real, I could probably make a full video with just the differences on this single class, and maybe I should, let me know if you want to see that. But did you know that Paladins' blessings used to be quite different, and even more short duration than they currently are? Blessing of Righteousness bears some familiarity name-wise to what we all know nowadays as Seal of Righteousness, but this version was much more different. Here at max rank, it will place a blessing on a friendly target, increasing their attack power against undead enemies by a pretty massive 370 for 25 seconds. Imagine having this buff actually existing during Naxxramas, for example. If this existed, each warrior, or just physical damage dealer in general, would have had a paladin assigned to them specifically just to keep Blessing of Righteousness up every 25 seconds. Talk about buff bot gameplay. Speaking of attack power buffs, there used to be different auras in the game as well, such as Dominance aura that has the same icon as Blessing of Might. However, this was a more offensive aura, whereas auras on live all tend to be defensive, apart from Retribution aura, but that is a special aura found in the Ret tree. This maximum rank of Dominance aura provided 130 attack power for all party members within 30 yards of the Paladin. Again, as a physical DPS player, you would have absolutely wanted this. In fact, this gives 30 more attack power than the maximum rank of the Marksman Hunter's True Shot aura, and that's a capstone talent, so this just being part of the old Paladins toolkit would have been kinda crazy. Overall, Paladins are already good nowadays for the various buffs they bring, but they could have been even better. Warrior used to have some crazy abilities which got toned down over time. One such example is Power Stance, which says that it increases critical strike chance by 100% for 10 seconds after it's used. So I read this as you use Power Stance and then you get one guarantee crit on your next ability, which would have have made warrior into much more of a stance dancing class, where you'd be cycling through this ability every time your hardest hitting abilities were coming off of cooldown. However, as far as I know, warriors still lost all rage by default when changing stances, and this was even true back then, so even if you kept 25 rage through the tactical mastery talent in the arms tree, this still would have felt a bit clunky to play with. Also, you definitely wouldn't have been constantly rage capped spamming heroic strike as you can nowadays with all your consumes and world buffs. So as cool as this ability sounds, you can probably tell why it was changed. The second ability is an interesting one called Spell Break that had 2 ranks. At rank 1 it cost what I'm assuming is 25 rage. These old databases often convert resources to mana by default, so don't worry about that too much. Anyways, for 25 rage, this allowed the warrior with no cooldown to free themselves from one harmful magical effect. This would have completely changed how warrior felt in PvP, especially against the likes of Frost Nova from mages, entangling roots from druids, and so on. If you were fighting versus a warrior, you'd have to be sure to have some kind of debuff protection active, such as Fairy Fire or Detect Magic. At rank 2 of Spellbreak, it would remove 2 spells instead, but it appears as though the rage cost has been increased to 75, which to be honest is probably too high to make it all that useful. At that point, just use a free action potion, they're not that expensive, or use rank 1 twice. Cool ability all the same that would have added a degree of self-sufficiency to the warrior, which they're otherwise lacking in vanilla, but ultimately it didn't make it to live. Shaman's Ghost Wolf appears as though it could have worked in one pretty big different way during the early stages of WoW. This tooltip shows a Ghost Wolf rank 2, which turns a friendly target into a Ghost Wolf, increasing their movement speed by 100% for until cancelled. Now the until cancel bit would have been a bit problematic for actually getting long-term use out of this spell as somebody benefiting from it, because we're talking about vanilla WoW here, and you can't interact with NPCs for quests and so on whilst you're shapeshifted into any animal form. You can't expect everyone to talk wolf now, can you? But for those long journeys your character takes, such as Undercity down to Arathi Highlands, or the first trip from Gromgrol in STV over to Kargath in the Badlands, this would have come in pretty clutch. I mean, I'd pay a few gold for this buff so I could zoom wherever I needed to be at epic mount speed. The only problem is, of course, it's magic dispellable, so you'd have to watch out for priests and so on. The second thing I found is Lightning Shock. This is very reminiscent of Earth Shock, but also combines a mini purge effect into it as well, dispelling one magical effect, on top of having very good base damage. Some NPCs in the game do still have a variation of this spell, but I think they got rid of the dispel part of it altogether. Still, this would have been a powerful instant cast ability just to throw out on cooldown against any class which relied on magical buffs. Hunter used to have some pretty wild abilities at their disposal too. One of them was Silencing Shot. This was an instant cast shot that silenced their target for 8 seconds. I don't think I need to say how unfun this would have been to play against as a caster, seeing as in vanilla there isn't really much you can do about being silenced unless you are a mage or paladin and can immune it off. This ability was later added back into the marksmanship tree in TBC as a new capstone talent, however it only silenced for a much more reasonable 3 seconds as opposed to this version. But as you know, in vanilla, Blizzard just loved CC being incredibly long, both against NPCs and players. Another shot that was cut from the Hunter was called Sniper Shot. This is basically a super buffed version of Aim Shot in all aspects. At max rank it was a 5-second cast with a 60-yard base range that would cause weapon damage plus 100. Imagine how fun this would have been to use playing as a Hunter in AV, defending towers and bunkers and so on. You could have even added on top the Hawkeye talent in the marksmanship tree to give this a total of a 66-yard range. Back in the day when you could get Grand Marshal weapons for just a bit of honor during TBC, I'd spend a whole lot of time lurking off to the side in AV and just trying to one-shot people with Aim Shot on my Hunter. If there was Sniper Shot, it would have made this so much more fun. Or the same, as fun as it would have been for the Hunter, similar to Silencing Shot, there's not really much counterplay you can have against this. You just have to line the sight or somehow get out of range in time. But if a Night Elf popped out of Shadow Meld and started charging this up, you better brace for impact. Druid is up next, and the first ability I have is called Scout Form. Now this very well could have just been an early version or name of Travel Form, which enables you to get around faster before you have a mount. But it also could have served more stealthy purposes. First of all, there's no movement speed modifier on this ability as Travel Form should have had, and the tooltip shows a very harmless, cute looking animal. So perhaps Scout Form was more shapeshifting into a harmless looking critter that would go unnoticed by enemies so you could, well, scout and infiltrate their ranks. I mean, technically you could still do this with cat form and prowl, which might have been why this was removed, but some enemies can still see through stealth, and players can too with enough detection or being close to them or with difference in combat levels. Scout form is more trying to hide in plain sight and acting like an NPC, or at least that's the way I interpret it. It appears as though at one point Blizzard were considering giving druids in vanilla their iconic Cyclone ability as well. Now of course this was another addition to the game that was brought in for the Burning Crusade, with it resembling this base version very closely in that it made the target unable to act or be harmed, but in TBC it was a much shorter duration CC. This being the vanilla version, obviously it lasted for 30 seconds, and it's basically Banish that worked on players, which as you can imagine would not have been very fun to play against in any way whatsoever, especially when it would have been spammable, and at least according to this, instant cast for some reason. Talk about a get out of any situation possible for free card for the druid here. This would have been overpowered beyond belief for resetting combat in PvP. Some NPCs in the game did inherit this ability in vanilla, you may have seen it when you're leveling, but for them it stuns you and often breaks when you take damage. This first version of Cyclone though appears as though it will be too strong even for vanilla. Rogue next, and I found some good ones for this class too. First up is a poison simply named Paralyzing Poison, which had a chance on hit to stun the target for 3 seconds. Now this may seem as though it's just going to grief some of your other stun related effects such as Cheap Shot and put them on diminishing returns, but Kidney Shot is on its whole own diminishing return in vanilla, so this really would have been a pretty effective, albeit random weapon poison to use. I mean, rogues are already known for their crazy levels of CC in vanilla where between abilities, cooldowns and items they can stop somebody else from playing the game for over a minute, and that is not an exaggeration. So Paralyzing Poison would have added a bit more flexibility to their rotation and CC chain. Maybe this procs and lets you spend a bit more energy before your next CC, or it enables you to escape when you thought you were out of options. Here is another ability, and a familiar one too, Expose Armor, or should I say the old Expose Armor. So the version we ended up getting in Classic reduced a flat amount of armor and could be improved by talents to make it more effective. However, it used to be different. The old Expose baseline at 5 combo points for 25 energy would reduce the target's armor by 40% for 30 seconds, and I even found an old talent linked to this where its armor reduction could be improved to 45%. Now to be honest, if you look up the armor values of bosses, this wouldn't have always been better than the armor reduction effects which exist today, but against enemies with very high base armor, this percentage decrease would have been very powerful. Mage had some rather questionable abilities early on in WoW, and one of them was Mage Armor, or should I say the old Mage Armor, because of course this spell exists in vanilla. However, the old version was a 3-second cast with a 30-minute duration for 110 mana that prevented the first 60 physical damage from harming the caster. So from the wording, it's not entirely clear how this would have worked. If it's just consumed by the first physical attack, then this is terrible. I mean, it would be barely even worth using. But if it straight up reduces physical damage taken by 60 for 30 minutes, especially when it says the first 60 physical damage, then this suddenly becomes very, very overpowered. Another way of describing this ability will be any enemy that deals 60 physical damage or less cannot harm the mage. And say if you're boosting or doing large pulls of enemies that all do a small amount of damage, this is going to massively reduce your damage taken. I've done a lot of Paladin AoE farming in vanilla, where of course you have Blessing of Sanctuary active that reduces damage taken by 24 at max rank, and it is extremely noticeable if it ever drops off for a few seconds. You just take so much more damage. So believe me, having a flat 60 damage mitigated would have been incredibly overpowered in the right circumstance. Mages also used to have a different long form CC ability other than Polymorph called Sleep. This ability was briefly changed from Priest to Mage and then back to Priest before being deleted, and the Mage ultimately ended up with their iconic Polymorph ability instead. One key difference in Sleep is that it would not cause the target to regenerate health quickly whilst under its effect, so it's way stronger than Polymorph would have been. Either way, Blizzard settled on the Polymorph spell for mages in vanilla, and Sleep remains a spell that you see now and again on certain NPCs. Next is Warlock, starting off with a curse effect which definitely bordered on being too powerful. This was called Crippling Curse. It had a 10-second duration and slowed the target's movement speed by 60% and their attack speed by 50% for 10 seconds. This would of course completely easily destroy any physical damage dealing focus class at the press of a button, and I imagine it served as a counterpart to Curse of Tongues to debuff casters. It was probably simply too powerful though versus melee, and as a result I think this was divided up into quite a few different spells that we do find in vanilla, such as Curse of Weakness, Curse of Exhaustion in the Affliction tree, and Cripple, which is an ability that Doom Guards often have in vanilla. Here's another cool spell which I kind of wish was iterated on a bit more, called Mind Bomb. I reckon this is a Warlock spell because A, it's got the Fell Hunter spell-lock icon, and B, it's a Shadow School spell. Saying that, priests usually have mind-related abilities, so I'm not 100% sure, but we're gonna go with Warlock here. This was an instant cast spell that would attach a Mind Bomb to the target, and if the target casts the spell within 1 minute, they would take 200 damage. Also, this was just single target damage, it wasn't AoE, despite the name Bomb often implying that. Now, 200 damage isn't much, but this was rank 1 of the spell, and there were no other ranks listed. Still, it's dealing damage for free that's instant cast versus anyone that wants to use spells in the game. Imagine applying your dots to a mage and then just sitting there spamming Mind Bomb like you're telling them to stop hitting themselves in the face. I don't know, that sounds kind of fun to me. Last one I've got for you is the Priest, and there's some really interesting stuff here. First up is what appears to have been a talent called Improved Resurrection, which says reduces the resurrection sickness penalty of your resurrection spell by 25%. So this implies at one point being res by a healer at all would have in fact applied resurrection sickness. This would have made dying at any point ever in World of Warcraft super frustrating. Imagine your tank dies in a dungeon, then you res them with this talented ability, and then they still have 7 minutes of resurrection sickness to AFK through before they're actually effective at playing the game again. I think it was for the best that it was just spirit healers who applied this debuff after you use them to resurrect, instead of it just being a blanket effect that's applied to all resurrections in the game. I also found this curious little ability named Holy Escape. This appears to kind of be Life Grip, but AoE. So it says it costs 200 mana, 5-second cast, and it would teleport 5 units within a 30-yard radius. So in other words, you could have maybe had a group of 5 people, and the priest could have just teleported you somewhere nearby with no cooldown. I'm not sure if you would just be teleported 30 yards in the direction that the priest is facing, or whether you could choose where you would be teleported to, but this ability would have so many use cases. Imagine if a priest just wholly escapes you past certain trash mobs in a dungeon so you can get to a boss faster, or for climbing up areas where you're not really supposed to go in the game. This is without a doubt one of the most interesting old abilities that I've found, but I reckon it was removed simply because I bet it would have caused so many problems for Blizzard to balance around this spell's existence, so they just couldn't make it work in the end. And that's it, just a few abilities that your class could have potentially had in a different version of World of Warcraft. Let me know if you want to see more content like this, or perhaps for me to go more in depth on a class by class basis of how things were during the alpha and beta of vanilla WoW. And as always, thank you all so much for watching and listening in, and I'll see you all in the next one very soon.